Hello, BookTube, and we're back with 1001 Nights, and I have with me this time Gavin, Genre Books, and
Hello.
James at Quaint and Curious Volumes. And we're a bit late because we're actually doing March's reading, which is stories 23 to 43, I think it was, or Nights 23 to 43. And we'd started some of that because there's a huge our long cycle called the Hunchback cycle, and we started that at the end of the reading the previous month, so that was in February, and then we finished that off this for March's reading, and as we sort of figured we'll talk a little bit about the stories, but also too each uh, sort of live, we'll sort of concentrate on one thing, and going to concentrate on Richard Burton's his translation this time. And I'll start out with just sort of a potted biography of Burton, just a very brief thing of him, and then we can go into the stories and the translation, his translation of it. So yeah, Richard Francis Burton was born in 1821 in Torquay. I don't know if he met Basil Fawlty or not, but maybe not. That's for the British viewers. So yeah, and then his parents moved to Elstree, so he sort of grew up in Elstree, Hertfordshire, and around the world. They traveled around. He went to Trinity College, Oxford, studied Arabic, but he didn't stay there for that long. In 1842, he joined the Bombay Army, and he actually saw some time in the Crimean War. And then in 1853, he decided to take a little trip on the Hajj to Mecca. But he wasn't the first sort of Westerner to do this. Jacob Burckhardt had done this about 40 years earlier, but his was sort of memorable. He wrote about it, and he took a lot of notes. Even when he was inside, he was taking notes. And if he would have been caught, he would have been killed. And there is the story that he might have actually had to kill somebody because he was caught standing up to take a pee, and that was not done by Muslims. So, but whether that was true or not is it's a bit of a myth, possibly. But it's something that he probably didn't mind nurturing these falsehoods because with his character. And then after he came back from the Hajj, he sat the test for the East India Company. We talked about this in the first time in the first live, where they would use the Arabian Nights as texts for teaching people Arabic. So he sat the test, but he'd already, he basically knew Arabic inside and out because he was able to go on the Hajj. He was even reported to have had memorized the Quran from beginning to end. But the person who was sitting the exam or running the exam recommended that Burton be failed. And there's a lot of animosity there that went on for years and years and years. But the academic George Percy Badger, who was part of this milieu as well, and he was asked to sit in and to grade basically Burton, but he declined that. But he did say that he wanted Burton to actually pass this. But yeah, there was a bit of animosity there. But then shortly after that, in 1854, he started his expedition to Somalia, and it was through the Royal Geographic Society to explore the East African coast. And this was with John Hanning Speke, and this is where they ran into a little trouble shortly in, where he got a spear through his face, through one side and out the other side. He survived, though, and then in I think it was just well, a couple of years later, he recovered in 1856. Burton and Speke set out again on a second expedition for the source of the Nile, the Great Lakes area of Africa. And that, I won't go into the details there, but Speke said he found the source of the Nile, which he said was Lake Victoria. Burton was too ill to actually go with him to see the lake, and there was a lot of controversy. So he's saying, well, there's not enough evidence to say that the Lake Victoria is the source, and they were going to debate this at the Royal Geographical Society, and Speke possibly committed suicide or hunting accidents at his estate. So the debate never happened, but it turned out to be that basically the Lake Victoria is one of the sources or the beginnings of the Nile. And then later in 1861, he married Isabel Arundel, who became Isabel Burton. And at that point, he went into he became a consular, and he was sent around to a few places. One of the places was South America. He did some exploring there. Wrote some exploration books. He was at Trieste, and that's where I think he finished up, was at Trieste. And he translated a whole bunch of stuff. He translated the Perfume Garden, but from the French into the English. But that was published, and he also had actually the manuscripts for doing that from Arabic to English, but it wasn't published at his death. And Isabel wound up burning a lot of his papers because, well, we're not 100% sure why, I guess, but she didn't really care for a lot of the stuff that he did because he was very interested in the sexual practices of other cultures. And he also, the Kama Sutra, I think it was Kama Sutra Society that he was part of, because you couldn't publish stuff that was sexually explicit because they would come down on you hard. But if you did it as a subscription service, like on Bounders, which is just a modern day subscription type service, that they would, because it wasn't going out to the public, it was going out to specific individuals. And that's where the 1001 Nights was published as well. And he died in 1890. And as I say, after that, his wife burned a lot of his papers. And there's a lot that's happened in between there. Like I say, this is just a very brief biography of him. But he's lived on in many ways, like with the 1001 Nights. That it's the most lauded translation, basically, and he winds up in fiction as well. And Riverworld series by Philip Jose Farmer, to name one, and Mark Hodder's Burton and Swinburne mysteries, which are really cool. They're steampunk, and he shows up in other places too as references to people. And yeah, so that's Richard Burton in a nutshell.
Yeah, so that I think it was called the Kama Shastra.
That's it. Yes, yeah.
But they did translate the Kama Sutra as well. Yes. So they did translate the Kama Sutra, the Perfume Garden, which you said, 1001 Nights, and the Stage of the Bodiless One, and it's another sort of, I don't know if it's an erotic text or a how-to manual, but it is euphemistically Eastern wisdom by subscription only. But yeah, it's a great way of getting around the obscenity laws. Is you're not actually publishing it.
Yeah,
it's a private thing.
Yeah, and it's like today you've got, because publishers don't do it, you've got the unbounders, where people, it's you subscribe to it, and you pay for a subscription and you get it. It's a little different, but it's still being done today, that kind of thing. And I'm still having trouble with my comments here, but yes, Summer's here, Sterling reads. Let's see here. And then there's another one that's got here. A how-to manual. Yeah. Well, you could look at it that way. And it's even for dummies because there's pictures.
And I mean, in a way, he's like an ideal translator. He seems to have this amazing facility for languages. What I've read is like between 25 and 40 languages that he spoke. Yeah. Some of these are dialects, but you get Arabic, Asante, Greek, Spanish, Portuguese, French, Icelandic, Persian, Sanskrit, Swahili, Pashto, Urdu. He just managed to pick it up wherever he went to.
Well, he pissed off, I think some of sorry, James, when he pissed off some of his tutors and everything because when he learned Latin, he learned the Greek and Roman Latin, not sort of, he was supposed to learn the sort of the medieval Latin, and he was able to do the ancient Latin where they couldn't do it. So, he showed them up, and he didn't mind doing that.
There's a scene in Mountains of the Moon, which is a dramatization from, I guess, from the 80s of his search for the source of the Nile, where he meets his in-laws to be, or he's like Isabel's parents, and he tells them about all the languages that he knows, and they're impressed. And he says, "But some Turkish dialects just baffle me." So,
yeah, and he wrote. He was an expert in sword, I guess bayonet and sword usage, and he wrote a book about that, and I think falconry as well. Like he wrote a book on falconry. And referring back to the Mountains of the Moon, there's a great scene in there with the actress, like she's at that party, I think, with the in-laws, and she says, "If I was a man, I would be Richard Burton."
Yeah.
I thought that was really good, which she probably never said, but it just worked perfectly.
But I mean, a guy who is a real swashbuckler, like a fictional character in real life.
Yeah, I mean, if he was a fictional character, he would be one of those unbelievable, hyper competent people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But I mean, you've got character flaws as well, which come across as fictional. Yeah. He is constantly, like you said, Sean, he gets himself chucked out of university. Pretty much got himself drilled out of the army. He fell out with just about everyone he went on expeditions with.
He was a difficult person.
Well, it seems to me that no one can really keep up with him. Mm-hmm. And if you can't move at his pace, then he hasn't really got the time for you. So, pretty much self-centered, but he had the this is the thing. But the bona fides to back it up.
Yeah, that's the thing, and not many of them did. They had the bravado and they had the the ego, but they didn't have the guts to back it up. They didn't have the brains, and he did. Like with there was a few people that for some reason in the 1800s, late 1700s, and early 1800s that were just amazing in languages and in Arabic studies. Like you've got Edward Lane too, that basically he was writing his lexicon, and it's still being used, and it wasn't completed. And then there was the Wortley Montague, Edward Wortley Montague, as well that preceded them, and then Jacob Burckhardt. Like all these, where are these people now? Like, is there anybody like that now?
Unfortunately, well, I mean, there probably are, but they work for the CIA or But I mean, this was a function of empire as well. I mean, he says this in the introduction to his translations, which James, you probably read this bit as well, where he says, what people are forgetting when we're publishing these works is that, I mean, he's talking in the 1880s, 1870s, 1880s. Is it? You forget that Britain is the largest Muslim empire in the world. It's like, well, yeah, it probably was at the time.
Yeah.
So why wouldn't you be learning the languages of your regions? And this is probably one of the reasons he spoke so many of them. Certainly, you wouldn't be learning all of these Indian languages unless he is out there. I'm not going to say sort of making new friends, but you have to be proficient in order to understand what's going on around you.
Yeah, and it's interesting that the company too. I always found, I always interested in the East India Company, the British one, and then the Dutch East India Company. But they all had this thing of, you learn the culture, you learn the language of people of the area that they're dominating and they're trading with. And I don't know, does that happen now with international companies? Do they even care that their employees know anything of the languages of countries, or they force them to learn whatever English? Usually, I guess
presumably between English and Chinese, you've got most commerce covered.
Yeah, I suppose now. Yeah.
But I mean, in those 18th and 19th century polyglots, a lot of them also would have been missionaries, and it would have been important for them to be able to translate scriptures and things like that for their I don't know if target is the right for the people they were proselytizing, So there was that. Although it doesn't seem that Burton cared too much about converting anyone to anything.
Yeah, I think he just had a very curious mind. He had his picadillos, like he had his specific things that he was interested in, and sexual was one of them. And I remember reading something, and it's a little graphic. I'll try to be less graphic than he was, but he was on a ship coming back, and there was a intersex or hermaphroditic child or teenager there at the time, and he just wrote clearly that he could not, as far up as he could not feel any testicles. And it's just he just wrote this stuff out just because he was very plain. It's just he was analytic, and in many ways for the time, he was definitely a like, would he have been, along with would he have been one of the last Renaissance men? Like people have said that, because like he might have known most things about everything. They say,
or you would at very least probably believe him if he made something up.
Yeah, and then he did this the translation, and I wonder, like I've read a few biographies of him, but not really big biographies. And something I'm gonna, when I read, I have a couple that I want to read that I haven't read, but I want to know is, where did he first was it during his studies at the East India Company? Is this where he actually had first access to the 1001 Nights manuscripts? Because I don't think it's mentioned in his introduction of where he first, or first discovered it.
I don't think it is.
No.
I don't think he...
And I kind of wonder if it is, because it was a text they used for teaching Arabic, because it's got naughty bits in, it's got lots of violence, and it would keep young people and males interested, I suppose, and it was probably a good text to use.
And there's a lot of it.
Yes.
So I mean, there are there are differences in his language. So I did a comparison, a brief one, between some of the language Burton is using and the language in the Madras and Mathas. So we do have a difference here of something which has been translated directly from the Arabic to the English to one that's been translated from the English to the French. From the Arabic to the French to the English. Burton says in his introduction that he's read lots of the other translations, and he gives his thoughts. He likes some, he doesn't like the others. He doesn't have much of a time for the ones that are translated into French. He says that they put too much of sort of Gallic idioms into the language itself. And I don't know whether what I'm seeing in the difference between the translations is a function of that. The structure is pretty much the same. The phraseology is different. And I think the actual sentence construction sounds a bit more like a translation from the French, whereas Burton's own translation from the Arabic, the sentence construction is different. But where you see the most difference is in the poetry. Because I think as soon as you're doing poetry, unless you are translating exactly a transliteration of what is in the Arabic, you are on your own recognizance to make the poem yourself. And with the Mathers translation of the Madras translation of the 1001 Nights, you are seeing there are some very big differences with the poems. The whole structure that Burton is using is very different from the ones I've read. Obviously, I've not had a chance to go through an awful lot of it, but the poems seem to be very much of their time. And I think if you went and read some of the older translations, the Lane translation, the Lane translation, that's the 1700s, isn't it?
No, it's 1800s still, yeah. But I don't think he didn't do a lot of the poetry. I don't think that's like some of them just threw the poetry out the window, and they didn't even translate poetry on some of them, I think.
Well, there may be more poetry in the original texts, but when I was going through it, looking at in the sections I was comparing like with like, the poems appear in the same places.
For Burton's, yeah.
Yeah, for Burton and Madras and Mathers. Yeah. So the structure is there, but definitely when it gets to the poetry, they just completely diverge. They're not even sort of ending up saying the same things. They appear to be just saying what they want to say. And also, I think, trying to get the meaning of the original poem and also to make it rhyme.
Yeah, like that's something that I just can't understand. Like, translation's bad enough, but or difficult enough, but to do poetry is, I don't know, that's got to be impossible to get even an inkling of what the original was. Like, all you can do is, I think, just if you're good at doing something like that, is you get the meaning, and that would be it, if you're lucky.
I remember there was that Tom Stoppard translation, or is it either Burgess or Stoppard translated the Cyrano de Bergerac, the film with Depardieu, and there's lots of poetry in that, and he's speaking French, and it's in the subtitles, all perfectly rhyming. I have no idea if that is how remotely related to what's being spoken that is, and without speaking French and Arabic, I can't really make any determination as to who's closer with their poem. But just the idea of a poem in 8th century Arabia is going to be vastly different from 18th century England or 20th century England.
Well, even just the non-poetry, the prose of this, is pretty clean. Like it's almost as if you're reading something that was written today. So they've done it in sort of very clear and contemporary language for us. And again, you kind of wonder, like, there's a few times where I read a sentence and I'm going, okay, that's almost jarring because it doesn't seem like it would be something that would have been said or written at the time. Like, it makes sense for now, but it's just, and then some of them, like I think it was Lane that was using like almost a biblical, or like the Bible, like the King James version of writing. It's almost like, well, we were reading H. Rider Haggard when he talks to the Zulus and he uses native African language. He slips into like the Bible, like these and thous, and it's like, I guess that was just a standard to show that it's not English, it's not everyday language.
Yes, I mean that helps linguistically, but I mean I suppose what you're saying there as well is just like, well, actually, this is a land that's out of time.
Yeah.
So I could say I speak perfect English and then just speak in Shakespearean, and
Yeah.
that's completely wrong and completely right at the same time.
Yeah, well, it's like that's why it's kind of strange when you do have something like Shakespeare, when they do translate it into modern day language, it doesn't quite ring correctly. It doesn't sound right, even though it rolls off the tongue easily. But yeah, it doesn't seem like, well, these people they're not going to talk like that then, and that's where a lot of this is. And then at least, I guess, if you use the King James version, at least it's something different. Like you're saying, like it's it's a different, things are different there. Like the past. What's the H.P. Hartley? The past. What is it?
It's a different
The
country.
past is a foreign country.
Okay.
They do things differently there. Hang on.
Yeah.
I've got it right.
There you go. Yeah, but yeah, that's like you get that with that kind of translation, but when it's fully contemporary, you don't get that. It doesn't seem like these people. And I guess on the one hand, it works because the people, like people got up in the morning and did things, and the reason why they got up in the morning and did what they did is pretty well the same as what we do now, and they've done for thousands of years. So that on the one hand makes sense, but also too, sometimes it's kind of nice to see something a little different, like that it's different. I don't know, it is kind of weird. So I think, and I kind of wonder if Burton, Lane, and even the French translators were thinking that way too. Don't translate it into modern language that they were doing at the time, because Burton's definitely is not something. It's not the kind of language that you'd see on the streets, I don't think, of Victorian London.
No, and I mean there's a lot of thous and wilts and stuff in that language as well. So, but then he is depicting something that happened in the 9th century. All right, it happened in 9th century Baghdad, but you want to say, well, this is something that happened a very long time ago. How do you expect this to sound? Well, I'll make myself sound a bit like a Puritan and work from there.
Yeah, because in English, like probably to an Arabic speaker that knows that kind of Arabic from that period, could maybe do it in their own language a little different, that they would know how it sounded, or at least in their mind they would create a sound that would make sense for that period, and then the English have to do it within the English way.
But I think we need an Arabic speaker to adjudicate on that, because It's not some monolithic language. 8th century Arabic is going to sound very different. So, I mean, go back to the Shakespeare analogy. Even when people do Shakespeare in the original Shakespeare language, they're never pronouncing it in Shakespeare's language.
No.
I mean, if I read Chaucer, I'm still reading it in my modern English, just vowel sounds. Whereas if you hear someone reading it in a what they imagine a Chaucerian was, the poetry makes more sense, but the language loses me sometimes.
Yeah, and I kind of wonder too, is like, because you're talking like 8th century Arabic to say 12th century Arabic to 18th century Arabic. Is there are there that vast differences in that as there is in English? Because you've got Anglo-Saxon, then you got Chaucer English, Middle English, and then you got more modern with Shakespeare. There are big differences there. Is it the same way with Arabic? I'm assuming it is, but again, I don't know.
So with Arabic, the classical Arabic is the Arabic of the Quran.
Correct. Right.
Yeah, and I think it's not something that anyone in modern day Arab speaking countries in Cairo would speak, but a lot of people understand it because that is like the standard text in everyone's, is the foundation of education. Even outside of the Arabian countries, Muslim countries, people study that text, so they understand Arabic of the 7th century, even though it's quite different. Yeah.
So chances are the manuscripts are very similar of 1001 Nights to the language that the Quran is written in. There could be a lot of similarities, or if somebody was translating that, or even if not, if they were making it more contemporary,
right,
they would either do it with like modern Arabic, or if they wanted to make it sound old Arabic, they would make it sound like Quranic Arabic, and then we with English make it sound like it's the King James version of the Bible. So we're going back to the religion again.
I'm going to guess that if the East India Company was using it as training for people who are going to be doing business and administering things in Arabic-speaking countries, that it was at least close enough to give them an idea, so they could actually, because they're not doing it so people are going to appreciate Arabic culture. They're doing it so that they can be effective administrators and get stuff done. Right. So if it worked for them and their mercenary ways, it was probably pretty close enough, I would say.
Yeah, and then it's an interesting thing, because I kind of wonder what else if that's all they used in their teaching, and how they did that, or was it just one of many things? Like, did they actually use the Quran as well, or other writings, because they kept finding, they found all the manuscripts. They found other manuscripts in Egypt for the 1001 Nights, and I think from the I'm reading, or I was reading a companion. I'm about halfway through it, to 1001 Nights, and it seems like again there are idioms of the time that are in the manuscripts that were copied down at that time, and then they got copied again, and then people modernized, to a certain extent, the language, and then others, English come along, or the French come along, and just they grab whichever one and try to make it sound, I guess, original, but Anyway, I think maybe we can move on from that a little bit. Is there anything else to say about the translation there, Gavin? Or
Well, I mean, I suppose not about the translation in terms of language, but just in terms of what is being translated, because going back to the actual text and going back to the reason this is a private subscription that's going out is society, or late Victorian society's reception of some of the language that is being used. And I mean, it's quite funny that now, obviously, this would be sort of quite tame by our comparison, and yet I think there are probably countries in the Middle East where the Arabian Nights would be absolutely verboten. And it's just funny how it sort of flips around like this. No country is immune from having bouts of, well, no country or culture is immune from having bouts of censorship. And I think Burton talks a lot about it in his introduction. I think he knows he's picking another fight here. He quotes Sir William Jones that says that anything natural can be offensively obscene never seems to have occurred to the Indians or their legislators, a singularity pervading their writings and conversation, but no proof of moral depravity. And you can see this. I mean, obviously, you can understand why people were not happy that new stuff is being produced in Victorian England that has this obscene kind of language. But how are they still printing Chaucer at that time, which is baldy enough in itself that if you claim one as a great of English literature and you decry one as morally depraved, you are just being a complete hypocrite, which is probably sort of the normal resting position of your eminent Victorian. But it's you see it now in other countries as well, and you'll see it again in this one, no doubt, at some point in the future. But he says that the European novelist marries off his hero and heroine and leaves them to consummate marriage in privacy. But the Eastern storyteller must usher you with a flourish into the bridal chamber and narrate to you with infinite gusto everything that he sees and hears. But grossness and indecency are matters of time and place. I have carefully sought the English equivalent of every Arabic word, however low it may be, or shocking to ears polite. I think he knows he's going to get in trouble.
And that's where I think his notes, there's he had, he translated it and then he had notes, I think, in the text, but he also had other volumes with explanatory notes, commentary on the words, and I think he was just backing everything up. Like, he would just go into so much detail, and nobody else has done that. Like, not even this new translation. There's hardly any notes to it at all. There's just a little bit, and that's it.
Well, Burton thinks that the notes are essential, or at least he thinks his notes are essential.
Yeah.
He says, I can hardly imagine the Nights being read to any profit by men of the West without commentary. My annotations avoid only one subject, parallels of European folklore. So he's like, you have to have these notes to understand. And his notes are, I've only dipped a toe into them, but they are weird. And they are not politically correct. I'll say.
No, definitely not. Well, the thing was, like the 1001 Nights, even though it's Arabic and it was, it was popular, it was still frowned upon, like, to a large extent. And that's where it was, I think, done a lot in the coffee houses, where men were, and it was sort of a cloistered area, and people were reading it at nighttime, in behind closed doors. It wasn't fully accepted. And then also to the collection of stories that we have that we read from March, and the not just the Hunchback cycle, but the other ones, and they're drinking, and it's not like there are Christians, there are Jews being talked about, but these are Muslims that are drinking wine, and that's a bit. Well, that's not just a bit frowned upon. That's verboten.
Yeah, but I mean, the genesis of these stories come from
Exactly. Yeah.
From India and from a time before those parts of the rules were part of Muslim culture.
Yeah.
Because even in the Quran, I think the Quran says, and I'll be willing to be corrected by anyone who knows better, but the Quran says, don't drink. Is specific to wine. Is specific to fermented drink from grapes. So to get around that, lots of people just got into date wine. So they would make it from dates, and they would make it from other fruits, and so they found a loophole in the actual word of God. So all the clerics had to come around and they issue a hadith that says, right, no, it's all booze. And since then, booze has been off the table.
Yeah. Well, yeah, but the thing is that it's still in the text. Like, that's the thing, because they didn't like I'm sure some of the manuscripts might have changed it and took out the wine parts, but in this text they didn't. So there were texts that were being passed around that they were reading about people drinking wine.
I'm sure there must be a sanitized, bowdlerized Arabic version of the Arabian Nights, like there is when for decades everyone thought it was basically a children's story. Yeah. Oh, it's just Ali Baba, it's just Sinbad, it's just Aladdin, and forget all of these other bits. Here's some nice pictures. Here's a flying carpet. Here's something else.
So let's now sort of move to the stories that were, or the cycle, the Hunchback cycle that we started in the first one, and then it goes on for quite a long time. I can't remember how many nights it is, but this poor Hunchback who dies and dies over and over again, theoretically, because everybody thinks they killed him. And they just dump him down the air vents, stick him outside, throw him down the stairs. And then everybody thinks that they killed him, and they keep moving him somewhere else until it gets to the court of law. And they're saying, oh, well, yeah, no, he didn't do it. I killed him.
Yeah, I mean, this is everything from sort of bedroom fast to Weekend at Bernie's, all rolled into one. There's a lot more comedy in this month's reading compared to last month, and a lot less magic. There's no genies here. There's no, wizards casting spells and stuff. It is all grounded in human interaction and largely for comic effect.
Yeah, there was the genie or the djinn or whatever that at the beginning of the cycle were told them, don't leave the toilet or whatever, and stuff like that. But then, he disappears.
That was a different Hunchback.
Was it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was a Hunchback at the end of the previous one. The genie put the Hunchback in the latrine.
So it's a different Hunchback.
So that he could confuse someone about who he was having sex with. And then and that story ended. So this started with this Hunchback in China. The whole Hunchback thing takes place in China, by the way, even though all the characters are Muslims and Jews and Christians, and they're and when they tell their stories, they're like, well, when I was back in Baghdad. So you can try to place it in China, but everyone's like, well, in Baghdad, this is what happened.
But I suppose it's talking about people being extremely thick. You don't want to be saying that that's happening in Baghdad when you are presenting a story in Baghdad.
Right.
Yeah.
It's this is the English telling, in the English in the 1970s and the 1980s telling jokes about the Irish, or the Germans make jokes about the Austrians. It's always the sort of the country cousins. So this is like, we're going to move it. We move the story to China.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then there's it's just it's hilarious because at the end everybody's saying that they killed him, and then it's like the barber that comes in and takes the fish stuck in his throat and hey, what happened?
Yeah.
He's alive.
And there doesn't seem to be any explanation of why the tailor's wife wanted the hunchback to swallow this chunk of fried fish. That started the whole thing. It just is like, I just got this crazy idea.
Yeah, I mean, they seem to do they do make their own entertainment.
Yeah,
and it just the whole story thing just rolls on. It's the same thing. There's the story within the stories, but the other thing that I always find strange is some of these stories were like, in book page length, 15, 20 pages long. And then you get another, and she's telling the story, Scheherazade telling the story, and it's like, oh, the night's over. And then the next story is only 3 pages long. And I'm going, like, these are different length of nights, or length. And I think it's partially where some of these stories were written down that were short, and then they were to be embellished by the person who's talking about it. So, and then maybe, like, obviously the ones that are longer are the fully embellished, or a fully embellished story. It's not the cut down one. But then we moved from I see. The thing is, I had so much time between finishing the other ones. I thought it was the bloody same Hunchback, but once you say it, it's not. But then we move on to what? Eunuchs. And it's like, how did you become a eunuch? It's like going back to the other one. How did you lose your eye?
How did you lose your eye? Yeah.
Yeah. So still balls, but
the baldy version, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, and we never find out how the third one lost his balls either. So
yeah,
I don't know if he comes back later on. Maybe that's.
I think we can probably make a guess. I mean, you've seen how sort of chop happy everyone is with the limbs.
Yeah,
everyone is losing their limbs.
Yes,
and their heads at times as well.
Well, yeah, that's a little bit more permanent. But we only realize this person's got a disfiguring injury when I'm upset or offended by the fact that he's eating with his left hand rather than his right. And there's it's a stump. Oh, interesting story, this.
Some are saying I'm always surprised by humor in old works. I don't know why. It's like, I think everyone has stick in the mud back then.
No, we're sticking the muds now. That's the problem. Yeah. Victorians then, Americans these days.
Yeah, no, it's like, and the thing is too that I'm kind of surprised that there's no explanation in here. I wonder how many people understand reading this, the difference, why it was offensive that he was using his left hand to eat. I wonder, because there's, I'm sure Burton, goes into so much scatological detail of that, but which would be interesting in itself.
Yeah, that is the kind of thing Burton would go on about in his notes. But I don't think there's anything in the Lyons translation at all about it.
No, and I find that kind of strange. Like, how many people? Like, well, we got 8 people watching here. Summer is the only one that seems to be putting up. Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, I mean, not mentioned in your translation, not mentioned in this translation either. It's just, well, I knew. I think I only knew about it because once Gaddafi did it when he was meeting Tony Blair. there was a brouhaha, and it's just like, why? Is it? Oh, okay, this is it's just cultural sensitivities. It's like, in some countries, this does not mean okay, or
Right.
this does not mean okay. It's just,
Mm.
you've got to be careful.
Yeah, but it is interesting, but it's like, but it sets it up for it's not only for the story thing, but again with some black humor
Mm.
of how this guy lost his right hand, and it's the same as like how these guys lost their testicles,
Mm.
it's like and it just it gets really really as the quote that you I think it was Gavin that you read about the details that Burton puts in. He puts in the details, or of somebody gets married and they go happily off, sunset in European, but in the Eastern, it's like we get the details of what happens that
Yeah.
night. About there, and even the one scene was that what did they use, a pigeon or something like that to kill to show that she wasn't she was a virgin, on the mattress,
Right, to disguise it. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd never thought the phrase "they lived happily ever after" was a euphemism, but obviously it is. I'm looking at all fairy tales in a very different light. One thing I noticed in because the story structure, as you said, continues in this sort of nesting dolls way. One of the frames within the frames here is that Scheherazade tells the king that this is a story that Jafar ibn Yasin Bamaki told the caliph. So I looked the guy up. So Jafar ibn Yasin Yahan Bamaki, he is Jafar from the Aladdin cartoon. It's the same guy. Or to put it in your frame of reference, Sean, it's Conrad Veidt from Thief of Baghdad. It's the same character. He seems to be one of the good guys who's just been painted as being evil. Not so much in 1001 Nights, but every depiction of him afterwards, he's always this sort of this power behind the throne. And he wants to catch Aladdin in this, and he wants to take the caliphate for himself in another story. He's actually the guy that opened the first ever paper mill in Baghdad and imported this new technology of paper basically to the Middle East and therefore to the West. So we have him to thank pretty much for modern books. I think he's been done dirty.
But he must have done something to somebody to do that.
Well, he upset somebody because he was vizier or wazir to Al Rashid from 798 until 803, and then he was executed. So he loses his head. So this is life imitating art here.
And the other thing that I noticed, one thing that's always consistent, somebody's always waking up with a dead body in their bed, and blood is described in a certain way every time. Not being, it's more of a liquid. Like they think that they're sweating, that it's very hot or something like that, and not sticky and things like that. So I find that interesting of how, I don't know why I'm finding that interesting, but again, I'm sure Burton probably has some kind of thing with the stickiness or something like that. I'm sure he's going. I'm sure he's going to do that. Some are saying, I read a book about boys being castrated to keep pure high voice. Yeah, castratos. I'm guessing that's not why those men were cut. No, it was.
It's because they're going to be serving in the harems and stuff, and they need the people in charge need to know that the men servants are around can be trusted around the women. So That's a Route 1 solution.
Well,
they were also, it was also a punishment in those stories. It was a punishment, and then since they were already slaves, when it was done to them, then they were sold as eunuchs, which gave them a sort of an extra value because they could serve women. And
well, there's that one where the young guy and he's sort of like they're it's almost as if they're not related, but they're like, they're almost brother and sister. And again, it's just offhand, just again, like Burton is saying, just a plain description of what happens or what can happen. And and in some ways it's almost funny, just that description. I don't know if it was meant to be funny at the time, but it's actually funny now of how they describe, arousal and things like that. I won't get into actual details, but
I suppose it'd be less funny at the time when it was a potential real thing that could happen to you. It's you don't want to be caught. All right, let's stick with the losing your arms for the moment to keep it clean. But it's just like, okay, yeah, it's funny that they've all lost their limbs. It's like, well, no, it's not funny. That's what happens. If you get caught, that's what happens. If you're reading this in 10th century Middle East, you're gonna not see as much humor in that, I don't think. But then they make the humorous reasons because of it. And, it gets incredibly convoluted. I do love it. I found this just a lot more engaging than the first set of stories. The first set of stories are all good, but they're very self-contained. This really sort of rolls across. And I think the barber is just a great character. He's a comedy archetype even now. The person who will not shut up.
Right.
Says how polite and quiet and circumspect he is, and will not shut up about it.
I'm the silent. I'm the brother. I'm the silent one. Right. Yeah, it's they were good, and I don't know if because I was hoping every time we do this that I would end it with a really choice sort of quote, but I couldn't find one that really worked nicely for this time. But I do have one for the next time, and I don't know whether I should use it for now because there might be more coming along, or leave it for the next time.
I'll save it for next time, Sean.
Yeah.
Give people a reason to come back.
Yeah, but it is a good one. I'll tell you that. It's a good one. Anyway, so what are we reading? Well, currently for April, it's 44 to, I'm not sure which number off the top of my head, but
the nights sort of speed up a bit, don't they?
Yes, yeah, they do, yeah, because they're shorter. They're a lot shorter now. For this last one, that's what I was saying. There were some long ones, like 15 pages in the Penguin edition, which seemed to me long. Sorry, I'm just going through. Yeah, Summer is the only one that's been posting comments, unless I'm not seeing everything. So if I have missed anybody else's comments, I do apologize. But all I'm seeing on my end here is Summer's comments. So, but yeah, so we'll be back. I don't know. Hopefully not this far into May for the next ones. Maybe the first week of May. Well, this is the first week, isn't it? Or is it second? It's
the second.
Second, yeah. So hopefully we can catch up a little bit next time.
Oh, and he's now commenting.
Oh, okay.
You're shaming people into commenting now.
Sorry, I didn't comment either.
You're going to read the register.
Yeah. Well, like I say, it's just with these new comments that are coming up on StreamYard, but it seems like it's only for tablet or something else because it's not on the computer. Apparently, it's just I don't know if I'm seeing everything. So yeah, probably all of a sudden once we finish it, everybody will start commenting. But anyway, we'll see you next time. And thanks, Gavin, and thanks, James, for joining me. And I hope this was fun for anybody who's watched. And it was a good set of stories. And again, we'll figure out something to sort of highlight again for the next one. And then we will talk about the stories, but it's like, the stories are the stories. I find sometimes the background information as interesting, if not sometimes more interesting. So anyway, we'll see you next time, everybody. Bye now.
Bye.